I have to confess that I'm afraid that all I will be able to do today is disappoint you because Wayne has given me a big buildup and I'm not going to be able to be funny and there's not going to be any baking soda, although there will be some Brother Lawrence. So I confess my sins at the beginning and hopefully we can go on from there. I want to start with a reading from a strange passage from the letters of Paul from 1 Corinthians chapter 7 on whether we should be single or married. And as you read or listen to this chapter, you should always remember that Paul has a clear expectation that Christ may be coming back any day now. And so he often says, don't do anything rash, don't make any changes in your situation because everything's going to change in the blink of an eye. There's just no point in making any changes right now because the whole world is coming to an end any minute. That's part of what you will hear in this passage, but I think even though it was written in the expectation that that certainly the second coming would occur before most of these people died, it still has something to say centuries later. I should still like everyone to be as I am, but everyone has a particular gift from God, one of this kind and another something different. To the unmarried and to widows, I say it is good for them to stay as they are, like me. But if they cannot exercise self-control, they should marry, since it is better to be married than to be a flame. Anyway, let everyone lead the life that the Lord has allotted to each person as when the call came from God. This is the rule that I give to all the churches. If a man had already been circumcised when he was called, then he should not disguise the circumcision. If a man was uncircumcised when called, he should not be circumcised. Circumcision or the lack of it is nothing, only the keeping of God's commandments. Let each remain in the condition in which you were called. If you were called as a slave, that is of no concern. If you can gain your freedom, make use of the opportunity. Someone called as a slave is a free man of the Lord. Similarly, someone called as a free man is a slave of Christ. You were bought at a price. Do not become slaves of any human being. Each one of you, brothers and sisters, should remain before God in whatever condition you were called. I want you to be free of anxiety. The unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord, how he may be pleasing to the Lord. The married man is anxious about worldly things, how he may be pleasing to his wife, and he is divided. And then he goes on with another verse about the same thing, applying to single women and married women, that they are anxious about different things and they are divided. So all that we know of Brother Lawrence can be contained in a book this size. It is not a great deal. Brother Lawrence himself was not a writer, so he was not someone like, say, St. John of the Cross, who wrote an entire book full of spiritual instruction. Brother Lawrence wrote almost nothing, but his life was marked by such contentment that several of his superiors in the order to which he belonged interviewed him about how he had come to that state of contentment. He wrote about 15 or 16 letters which have been collected, and then he wrote a few short papers on spiritual maxims. And that's it. That's what we know. That's what we have. And so mostly what we have when we consider what might be called the practice that we attribute to him, practicing the presence of God, is mostly the accounts of other people and a few of his own accounts that we're trying to draw on. And I wanted to draw out more of the connection between what Brother Lawrence was talking about in practicing the presence of God and our own daily average lives. And the more I tried to do that, the more difficulties I found. And the chief difficulty being that it became really clear to me the difference between having a religious vocation and having some other kind of vocation. And by religious vocation, we tend to mean, we tend to refer to men and women who remain single and often withdrawn from the world in order to be more wholly devoted to God. So generally, monks and nuns and priests. And there's a difference between that vocation, that religious vocation, and the kind of vocation that most of us have, which is to friends and family and a social life in the world. And one of the places where this most struck me, the difference between Brother Lawrence's vocation and mine, was a place where he was summing up in his words what the aim of our life was to be, what the meaning of life was. And he said, the end that we should propose to ourselves is to be, even in this life, the most perfect adorers of God that we can, as we hope to be for all eternity. To be and to become the most perfect lovers of God that we can be. And I just honestly don't think that is the goal that most of us would propose for ourselves. One of the ways that people with a religious vocation sometimes refer to themselves or consider themselves, they consider themselves to be the bride of Christ. They are married to Christ. I happen to be married to my wife, and I am not unhappy that way. So if I don't want to be married to Christ, if you don't want to be married to Christ in the way of a religious vocation, then the question is, what do we want from God? Or what do we want from our relationship with God? And that's actually not the same question, although right now I'm going to treat it as though it were the same question. And one answer that would readily come to hand for most of us, because it is so prevalent in our culture, is that what we want from God is salvation from hell. Both in this life and after death, we want salvation and redemption. We want a passage to heaven. We also want life beyond death and the certainty of being united again with those souls which are dear to us. And in this world, not focused on an afterlife or a beyond, in this world, from God, we want inner peace. We want miracles, a sense that we can influence the chaotic and uncontrollable forces and events of nature, including illness and death. We want to be known in our entirety. We want to feel that there is a being that can accept and love even the worst parts of us that we never share. We want God to give us purpose, to see ourselves as part of a larger tapestry of creation that God is continually weaving. We want a power that we can draw upon to provide us with the spiritual power that we lack, with courage, hope, fortitude, grace, mercy, forbearance, gentleness, and love. We want a well, a source of love to draw upon as we try to follow in the way of Jesus by loving our neighbors and our enemies. We want a world with beauty in it and awe and mystery. We want something far greater than ourselves to which we can belong and even become united. We want an invitation and the assistance to go beyond the self-concern which can imprison us to the liberation of giving ourselves away. We want an answer for the sometime yearning in our heart that wants there to be more to the world than what we have seen of it. When we sometimes ask ourselves, is this all there is? We want God to answer us, no, there is yet more and greater than this. There was a period of time in which I believed that the religious vocations were a human invention that met the need for a place to send people who had no property, and that they served as a refuge for those whom, for one reason or another, could not find a place for themselves in the world. That was before I had a family. And the more I became interwoven with my family and the lives of my family members, the more deeply settled I became in my family's love, the better I understood Paul's advice about singleness. I want you to be free of anxiety. The unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord, how he may be pleasing to the Lord. The married man is anxious about worldly things, how he may be pleasing to his wife, and he is divided. If I had to choose between devotion to God and devotion to my family, I am not sure which would win out. And by family, I want to expand that to mean the circle of people for whom I care, my good friends, the people I work closely with. Would I abandon them if I felt God called me to do that? I don't know. But that gives me difficulty in some ways in relating to Brother Lawrence, who is very clear in the things that he says. That because he is in such constant communion with God, he may walk through a day and fail to recognize the things around him. He will be completely joy-filled while eating dinner and rise from the table and have no idea what he has eaten. He will do his work as though he were not doing his work, because his communion with God is so constant and so intense that he does not see the things of the world. For myself, that's not the way I find God, as an abstract thought. But the other thing that Brother Lawrence is concerned about that I think I have more in common with is his idea that it is not right to love God for what God can do for you. In the religious vocations, he is not alone in this concern for loving God for the right reasons, which is basically to love God for God's character, for God's being, for who God is, and not for the things that come from God, like a sense of blissful peace or an answer to prayer, or something going the way that you might want it to. In this particular edition of the works of Brother Lawrence, the editor uses a prayer from someone else at around the same time period and says that it could very much be the prayer that Brother Lawrence would offer. And having read it, I believe that she's correct. If I love thee from fear of hell, send me to hell. If I love thee from hope of heaven, keep me from heaven. But if I love thee for thyself, let me come to thee. We have this same difficulty in our human relationships. If we have not a religious vocation, but a family vocation, what God asks of us in fulfilling that vocation is to love the members of our family for who they are and not what they can do for us. To see them for who they are and not their potential service to us. Even if that service is to draw us nearer to God. The difference between these two ways of loving, in some ways, it seems like a difference of semantics, but I think most of us have had an experience of a love that came with no strings attached. At least I hope we've had that experience. That was not my experience growing up. It was clear that the things that were done for me, the food that was given to me, the laundry that was washed for me, the gifts that were given, came with the expectation that, and in a way, a noble expectation, not an evil expectation, but an expectation that would bind me into the relationship, that I would be tied by these gifts, that the people who loved me were earning my love by what they did for me, and therefore I owed my love to them. You cannot be too hard on someone whose motivation is for you to love them. And yet, it's not a pure motivation. This became crystallized for me in the year that I lived with Ann and Jim Ellis during the week and went home on weekends. Most weekends. Some occasional weekends I did not go home. Something at the college was happening and I had to stay. And sometimes on Saturday or Sunday, Ann would say to me, "You must be hungry. Can I make you a sandwich?" And I said, "No, I'm fine. I'm fine. I don't need a sandwich." She said, "No, you really, you must be hungry. Just let me make you a sandwich. I'm going to make a sandwich anyway. Let me make you a sandwich." And what I gradually came to realize was that that sandwich from Ann came with no strings attached. She had no expectation of anything I might do for her in exchange for that sandwich. She made me a sandwich because she thought I was hungry and she cared for me. I realized that I had not had many sandwiches that came that way. And so if our family is going to be our vocation, we have to be careful in how we love them, that we love them purely, not for what they do for us, they give us, they could potentially do for us, but in the way that we love God's creation for the thing, the glory, the mystery that it is. Having said that, with that caution, I think then the way that we apply Brother Lawrence's way of life to our non-religious vocation is in most regards the same. He said, I used to shut myself up in the place that obedience had destined for me, which was the kitchen. There alone, after having arranged all the things necessary for my duty, I used to devote to prayer all the time that was left, as much before my work as after it. At the beginning of my duties, I would say to God with filial confidence, my God, since thou art with me, and since by thine order I must occupy my mind with these external things, I beg thee to grant me the grace to remain with thee and to keep thee company. But that it may be the better done, my Lord, work with me, receive my labors, and possess all my affections. Then, during my work, I continue to speak to him familiarly, to offer him my little services, and to ask his graces. At the end of the action, I used to examine how I had done it. If I found good in it, I thanked God. If I noticed faults, I asked his pardon for them, and without being discouraged, I purified my intention and began again to dwell with God as if I had not strayed from him. Thus, rising up after my falls and making a multiplicity of acts of faith and love, I have arrived at a state in which it would be as impossible for me not to think of God as it was at the beginning to think of God. There are times when we use people with instrumentality. When we go through the line at the grocery store, we are just usually not that concerned with the humanity of the grocery store clerk. We are not looking to start a relationship. We're not particularly interested in who she or he might be. And in general, that is the way of the world. But if our vocation is in the world, Brother Lawrence would remind us that no one is instrumental. They are God's creation. They are not our way to God, but we are drawn to God by seeing God's creation in them. I think where Brother Lawrence finds adoration, we might find gratitude. Here is my wife. God, I am grateful. Here is my best friend. God, I am grateful. Look at the wonders you have worked in their lives. God, I am grateful for that. We can also bring God along, Christ along in the way that Brother Lawrence does, this continuing conversation. But as opposed to Brother Lawrence, not to the exclusion of anyone else's voice. I don't think Christ would be particularly happy with me if I were listening so hard to Christ in my left ear that I did not hear my wife say in my right, Dan, the kitchen is on fire. I think this would not be really a true living out of my vocation in the world. But for any of these things on this list, the certainty, the inner peace, the sense of contentment, the things that people found in Brother Lawrence's life that they admired, his stability, his disposition to not be riled up or flustered. One of the things people said over and over was, no matter how busy things got in the kitchen, he always worked at the same measured pace. His ability not to feel harassed. The answers to some of these questions come in that constant conversation with God, not perhaps the adoration that Brother Lawrence devoted his life to, but a conversation, an ongoing conversation that constantly recalls us to the presence of God with us in this world.